The armored rover groaned as it rolled through the blazing streets of Valen, capital of the desert planet Vishara. Captain Mason Cole wiped sweat from his brow, the heat from the twin suns beating down even through the vehicle's cooling system. 3 years on this planet, and still it felt like living inside an oven. He steered through the empty streets, past shuttered stalls and half-broken buildings. The air shimmered like glass. He muttered to himself, "Another perfect day in paradise," and reached for the comm unit on his wrist. Static answered him. Typical. Communications always went down when you actually needed them. The locals had been restless lately. Too many patrols, too many questions from the Terran Outreach Corps. And the people of Vishara were tired of soldiers from the stars. He didn't blame them. He took a narrow turn toward the outskirts, a route that cut through the market square. The streets were quiet now, too quiet. No children playing. No merchants shouting. Even the wind seemed to stop. Mason slowed down, instincts kicking in. That's when he saw it. A shape lying across the road. He slammed the brakes. Dust rose in a thick red cloud around the rover. Mason's hand went to his pistol automatically. He scanned the rooftops, the corners, the doorways, empty. The silence was heavy, like the whole city was holding its breath. He stepped out, weapon drawn, boots crunching in the hot sand. The shape wasn't debris. It was a person, a woman. Her skin was a strange blue, like the color of a clear ocean, now covered in bruises and dried blood. Her wrists were tied with rough rope, her ankles bound so tightly that the skin was raw. White hair tangled across her face. She wasn't moving. Mason's heart thudded once, hard. He had seen plenty of bodies before, but something about this one felt wrong. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a message. Someone had left her here on purpose. He crouched beside her. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of violets. She stared at him in confusion and fear. "No, please. Don't. I'm not going to hurt you." Mason lowered his pistol slowly, his voice calm and firm. "I'm going to cut you free." She flinched as he pulled out his combat knife, but didn't resist. He cut the ropes carefully, tossing them aside. Her limbs trembled as circulation returned. He offered her his canteen. "What's your name?" "Alira," she whispered. Her voice was weak, almost musical. "You should go. If they see you with me, they will kill you." "Who?" he asked. Her gaze drifted toward the distant towers. "The Scarlet Claws," she said bitterly. "They rule this city. I refuse the prefect's offer of marriage. This is what happens to those who say no." Mason clenched his jaw. He'd heard the name. The Scarlet Claws were more than a gang. They controlled trade, politics, and half the security forces in the sector. The kind of power that thrived on fear. "So they beat you and left you here to die?" She nodded faintly. "It is our custom," she said with a trembling smile that wasn't a smile at all. Cruelty made into law. Mason felt a pulse of anger rise inside him, the kind that burned slow and cold. He had seen too many worlds like this, broken, ruled by monsters who called themselves leaders. He looked down at her, this stranger with blood on her face and pride still in her eyes, and something inside him shifted. He sheathed his knife and lifted her gently into his arms. "Don't worry," he said. "You're safe now." "No," she whispered against his chest. "You're not." He carried her back to the rover and laid her across the seat. As the engine roared back to life, Mason glanced in the rearview mirror. Shapes moved in the distance, figures stepping from the shadows, watching. Predators marking their prey. "Where are we going?" Alira asked weakly. "Somewhere safe," Mason said, though he wasn't sure such a place existed anymore. As they sped toward the Terran base, the first echoes of trouble followed. An engine's growl behind them, a flicker of movement on the rooftops, a trail of dust far too close. Inside the fortress walls, alarms blared. The guards at the gate straightened, then froze at the sight of the woman in Mason's passenger seat. "Captain Cole, sir," one of them stammered. "That alien." "Medical emergency," Mason snapped. "Open the gate." The guard hesitated. Regulations were clear. No civilians inside the compound, especially locals. Mason's eyes hardened. "You want to argue while someone dies?" The gate opened. Inside the medical bay, doctors rushed forward. As they treated Alira's wounds, Mason stood watch, arms crossed, jaw tight. When Colonel Rhea Park stormed in, she didn't bother with greetings. "You brought an unauthorized alien into a Terran military zone. You want to explain yourself?" She was left to die in the street, Mason said. By your friendly neighborhood gang lord, Malgur. Captain, the colonel said sharply. We're here to stabilize relations, not interfere in local traditions. Mason met her eyes. Then maybe our mission's broken. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert. Not weather, but engines. The outpost sensor screamed. Multiple hostiles. Armed. Advancing fast. Alira's voice came from the infirmary bed, weak but certain. They have found me. Mason turned toward her, hand already on his weapon. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt purpose. The alarms howled through the Terran outpost like angry spirits. Mason Cole was already moving before the command siren finished its first wail. The desert outside glowed orange under the twin suns, and black dots were forming on the horizon. Vehicles. Dozens of them. Fast. Colonel Rhea Park's voice cracked through the comm. Perimeter breach. Eastern sector. All units to defensive positions. Mason grabbed his rifle and sprinted through the corridors toward the command deck. The base shook as the first mortar shell hit, sending dust raining from the ceiling. He burst into the control room, where chaos had already taken shape. Officers shouting, screens flickering, red warning lights painting every face in emergency glow. Status, he barked. They're using military-grade weapons, Lieutenant Vega reported, pale and wide-eyed. Not raiders. Organized. Coordinated. Mason's eyes narrowed. Scarlet Claws don't have that kind of tech. Rhea Park's grim face appeared on the main holo display. They do now. I just got confirmation. They're backed by Prefect Malgur's private militia. Half the city's security force is in their pocket. Mason's stomach tightened. So the government's attacking us. Rhea's tone was cold. Officially, no. Unofficially, we're being tested. They want that girl. That girl. Alira. He didn't wait for orders. Mason turned and ran. The corridors were filled with soldiers rushing to their stations, the heavy thud of boots mixing with the distant crack of energy fire. When he reached the medical wing, 2 guards were already posted outside her door. Step aside, he said. Sir, the colonel ordered. Mason didn't slow. You want to argue about orders while the base burns? The guards hesitated, then moved. Mason entered the room. Alira was sitting up now, pale but alert, her violet eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. She had changed into a plain gray jumpsuit, the medical band still blinking on her wrist. They're here for me, she said quietly. You must let me go. Not happening. Mason began checking his sidearm, his movements fast and practiced. She rose unsteadily. You don't understand. If they find me here, they'll destroy this place. Everyone in it. Mason met her gaze. Then we make sure they don't. Her lips parted as if to argue, but he was already motioning her toward the door. Can you walk? She nodded weakly. They moved through the dim back corridors of the compound, avoiding the main halls where gunfire echoed. Mason kept one hand on his rifle and the other guiding her forward. Who are you really, Alira? He asked. Because nobody sends half a planet's army to retrieve a runaway bride. She stopped for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak. Then, softly, my full name is Alira Varen. My father was the Narration envoy to this world. He discovered evidence of Malgur's corruption, illegal arms trade, slavery, even off-world trafficking. Before he could warn the Galactic Council, they killed him. And you have that evidence? She tapped the side of her temple. Encrypted in my neural core. Hidden where scanners can't reach. Mason exhaled. So this isn't about a marriage proposal. It's about silencing the last witness. Yes, she said. And anyone who helps me will die. He gave a small, humorless smile. Guess I've already made that choice. Outside, another explosion rocked the base. A section of the eastern wall collapsed in a roar of smoke and sand. Mason turned to her. We're leaving. Now. They reached the motor pool just as the hangar lights flickered and dimmed. A low whine filled the air, the sound of jamming signals cutting through their systems. Mason cursed under his breath, hot wiring a transport rover while Alira kept watch. I can drive, she offered. Not today, he said, slamming the control lever forward. The vehicle roared to life, lifting slightly off the ground as the repulsors engaged. They shot through the side gate seconds before a barrage of plasma rounds hit the yard behind them. The shockwave lifted the rover for a moment before it steadied. Hold on, Mason growled. The desert stretched ahead, endless and golden under the twin suns. In the rear mirror, Trails of dust rose, enemy vehicles in pursuit. Do you have a safe place? Mason shouted over the roar. Yes, Illyra said, gripping the seat. There's a Narration refuge in the serrated canyons. They'll hide us. Coordinates. She closed her eyes, muttering something in her native tongue. North by northeast. 3 hours if we're lucky. Then we'll make it in 2, Mason said. For a moment, silence fell between them. Only the wind screaming past and the hum of the engines filling the void. Illyra looked at him, studying his profile, the hard lines of a soldier who had seen too much. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. He didn't look back. Because someone should. She smiled faintly, the first real expression of warmth he'd seen on her face. Then perhaps the stories about your kind are true. What stories? That humans are reckless, she said. But their courage is contagious. Behind them, the horizon burned red as the outpost fell under attack. Mason didn't look back. The mission didn't matter anymore. Orders didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was keeping Illyra alive. And as the rover sped into the endless desert, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't just saving her life. He was following a cause he didn't know he'd been waiting for. Somewhere inside him, under all the dust and discipline, the fire of defiance had finally reignited. The twin suns sank lower as the rover tore through the endless dunes. Every mile carried them farther from the chaos behind, and deeper into the unknown. The desert was silent except for the hum of the engine and the faint whisper of sand scraping against metal. Illyra sat beside Mason, her hands trembling slightly, though her voice remained steady. We are close, she said. The serrated canyons are ahead. The entrance will be disguised. You must trust me when I tell you where to drive. Mason squinted at the horizon. I've trusted worse odds. Before them, the land broke apart into jagged cliffs and narrow ravines. The air shimmered with heat. He slowed the rover, guiding it carefully between walls of crimson rock that rose high on both sides. The place felt alive, ancient, watchful. Keep right, Illyra whispered suddenly. That ridge isn't real. Mason frowned, but followed her direction. As they approached, the stone ahead shimmered like water. The illusion dissolved, revealing a tunnel carved into the mountain. Strange glyphs glowed faintly along its surface, Narration symbols, smooth and elegant. You weren't kidding, Mason murmured. Illyra's voice softened. My people built this sanctuary generations ago, hidden from the eyes of conquerors. They entered the tunnel. The rover's headlights cut through the darkness, revealing smooth stone walls veined with glowing blue minerals. The air grew cooler, cleaner. After a long descent, the passage opened into a vast underground valley, an entire city hidden beneath the surface. Mason's eyes widened. Towers of carved stone rose from the canyon floor, illuminated by hanging crystals that glowed like captured starlight. Waterfalls of liquid light trickled down from the cliffs, feeding channels that ran between narrow streets. Figures emerged from the shadows, tall, slender beings with blue skin and bright eyes. The Narration, Mason breathed. They surrounded the rover, weapons raised. Sleek metallic bows hummed with energy. Mason reached for his pistol, but Illyra stopped him with a hand on his arm. No sudden movements. She stepped out first, lifting her hands. Elder Torian, she called out in her native tongue. It is I, Illyra Varen, daughter of Envoy Calum Varen. A murmur rippled through the gathered guards. One of them, an older man with silver markings along his face, stepped forward. His voice trembled. The daughter of Varen lives. The others lowered their weapons at once. The elder approached, studying her face as if seeing a ghost. We thought you lost to the sands. I nearly was, she said. But this human saved me. The elder turned his gaze to Mason, a look both wary and curious. A human, he repeated, as though testing the word. You bring him into our sanctuary? He is my protector, Illyra said firmly. Without him, I would not stand here. Torian nodded slowly. Then he is welcome, for now. They led Mason and Illyra through the winding streets toward a great hall carved directly into the canyon wall. Inside, the air hummed with quiet power. Strange symbols glowed on the stone columns, forming constellations that shifted as they walked. At the center stood an ancient pedestal surrounded by crystalline petals of silver and gold. Illyra stopped before it, awe softening her expression. The heart of Vishara, she said softly. I thought it was a myth. Mason examined the structure, impressed despite himself. What does it do? It's a relic from before our exile, Elder Torian explained. When activated by royal blood, it creates a shield, that blocks all advanced energy weapons and comms signals within a wide radius. It was meant to protect our people in times of extinction. So it's a planetary defense system, Mason said. And you can turn it on. Alira nodded. The bloodline that built it can awaken it. My father told me about it before he died. Torian's expression darkened. To use it requires the rite of binding, a sacred ritual. And the ritual cannot be performed alone. The heir must have a protector, a living witness who shares her will. The elder turned to Mason. You are not Narration. You are an outsider. Yet she has named you her protector. That is unprecedented. Mason met Alira's eyes. If it keeps her alive, I'll play whatever part one need to. Torian studied him for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. We begin at dawn. Alira turned to Mason, her expression softer now. You don't have to do this. My people's traditions aren't your burden. Mason gave a faint smirk. Lady, if I'd wanted an easy life, I'd have stayed home. For the first time, she laughed, a quiet, musical sound that broke through the weight of the room. Then the laughter died. A faint tremor rippled through the floor. The crystals hanging from the ceiling flickered. One of the guards burst into the chamber, breathless. Elder. Movement in the lower tunnels. Dozens of heat signatures. Armed. Torian's face hardened. They found us. Mason's hand went to his sidearm. Then we fight. The elder shook his head. The ritual cannot be interrupted once begun. If it is, the heart may collapse, or worse. Mason loaded his rifle. Then give me your best fighters. I'll hold the tunnels. You finish your ritual. Alira looked at him, fear and faith mingling in her eyes. Mason, if they reach this chamber, it will all be over. He smiled grimly. Then we make sure they don't. As the alarm horns echoed through the hidden city, Mason Cole, a lone human soldier light years from home, prepared to face an enemy army beneath an alien sky. And for the first time since landing on Bashara, he knew exactly who he was fighting for. The warning horns kept echoing through the canyon, their low hum rolling through the stone like thunder trapped underground. Mason Cole sprinted down a narrow stairway with half a dozen Narration warriors at his back, their blue skin marked with glowing tattoos that flickered as they ran. The air grew colder the deeper they went. He could already feel the vibration of approaching boots and weapons far below. The enemy was close. Lower your lights, Mason ordered quietly. His voice was steady, trained from years of command. They'll be using scanners, not eyes. Let's make their tech useless. The warriors nodded. They respected him now, the human who had chosen to stand and fight beside them. Mason's mind moved fast. The tunnels were narrow, twisting, full of echo chambers and dead ends. It was the perfect ground for a small defense, if used wisely. He stopped at a junction where three paths met. The ceiling here was low, the walls slick with moisture that shimmered faintly in the crystal glow. We hold them here, Mason said. 2 on the left passage. 2 at the center. I'll cover the right. One of the warriors, a tall woman named Sira, frowned. But they outnumber us 10-1. That just means we don't have to aim, Mason said with a faint grin. He crouched and began setting up his traps. Simple, improvised devices made from what the Narration had on hand. Tripwires of thin metallic fiber, chime bombs built from mining tools, and jagged shards positioned to reflect heat signatures and confuse scanners. We make them see ghosts, he muttered. Within minutes, the defenders were ready. The tunnels fell silent again. Then the first sound came. The low crunch of boots on sand, the distant buzz of plasma rifles charging. They're here, Sira whispered. Wait, Mason said quietly, holding up a hand. Let them come closer. Shadows flickered down the left corridor, armored figures moving with precision. The Scarlet Claws had brought professionals. Their helmets glowed faintly, reflecting the red of their visors. Mason could almost hear the arrogance in their steady steps. When the first one tripped the wire, a tiny bell rang, soft and innocent. Then the ceiling exploded in dust and fire. The front rank of attackers went down instantly. Mason fired through the smoke, each shot clean and fast. The Narration warriors moved like water, sliding between the shadows and striking with bladed staffs that shimmered with energy. The tunnels filled with chaos, The enemy shouting orders in confusion, their scanners blinded by Mason's false heat signatures bouncing off the stone. Plasma bolts ricocheted wildly, sizzling against walls, burning holes through air and dust. Pull back to the springs, Mason shouted. Don't fight head-on, keep them turning. The Narration obeyed without hesitation. They had fought for survival before, but never under command like his. Mason's voice cut through the fear, giving shape to the battle. He was calm, deliberate, even when the ceiling shook with impacts. At the next junction, they regrouped. The air was thick with smoke and mineral mist from the underground springs. Mason knelt beside a stream of steaming water. It gave him an idea. He motioned to Sierra. You said these tunnels used to channel geothermal vents, right? Yes, Captain. Then we're going to use them. He adjusted the control valves along the wall, releasing bursts of scalding steam into the tunnels. The mist spread quickly, masking body heat and blinding thermal scanners. The next wave of enemies walked straight into the fog and never walked out again. From the shadows, Mason moved like a ghost. He waited for the perfect angle, then struck. One shot, one kill, clean and fast. His heart pounded, but his mind was steady. He'd been in too many battles to count, but this one felt different. He wasn't just following orders. He was protecting something that mattered. Minutes turned to hours. The sounds of fighting echoed deeper and deeper. The scarlet claws kept coming, but slower now, confused and afraid. They'd expected to crush a frightened refuge, not face a human soldier who fought like the stories they told to scare recruits. When the last of them fell, silence returned. The tunnels were filled only with the soft hiss of cooling stone. Mason leaned against a wall, catching his breath. His uniform was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes burned with purpose. Sierra approached, lowering her weapon. The heart still pulses, she said. The ritual continues. Good, Mason said. That means we did our job. But as he spoke, a faint vibration traveled through the ground, deeper than before, heavier. Mason froze. That's not footsteps, he murmured. That's machinery. He grabbed a fallen soldier's comm unit and tuned it to the enemy frequency. Static hissed, then a voice crackled through. Sector 12 teams are down. Repeat, we've lost contact with Units 3 and 4. Commander's orders, find the device and destroy it. Governor Malger wants no survivors. Mason's expression hardened. He switched off the comm and looked at Sierra. They're not retreating. They're bringing in something bigger. She frowned. What kind of something? He listened for a moment. The faint metallic rhythm in the distance, the sound of hydraulics grinding through stone. His answer came out grim. Walkers. Combat mechs. The Narration warriors exchanged fearful glances. They'd never faced such weapons, towering machines armed with plasma cannons, built for war. Mason pushed himself upright, his voice low but fierce. Get everyone ready. We'll fall back to the choke point near the heart chamber. If those machines reach Lyra before she finishes that ritual, this whole place is lost. Sierra hesitated. Can we stop them? Mason gave her a small, crooked smile, the kind soldiers gave right before doing something reckless. We're humans, he said. Stopping the unstoppable is kind of our thing. And with that, he lifted his rifle and started toward the trembling light of the deeper tunnels, where the roar of machines was beginning to rise, a sound like thunder made of steel. Somewhere above, the heart of Vishara glowed brighter, its rhythm matching his pulse. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. The tunnels shook as if the planet itself was growling. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep in the stone maze, the metallic thud of approaching mechs echoed, steady, powerful, and relentless. Mason Cole tightened his grip on his rifle and moved quickly through the dim corridors, his boots splashing through shallow pools of steaming water. Behind him, Sierra and the Narration warriors followed, their weapons glowing faintly blue in the half-light. How long can the ritual take? He called out over the noise. Sierra's voice trembled, not with fear, but urgency. The heart must align with her blood and spirit. If she's interrupted now, she won't be, Mason said firmly. Not while I'm breathing. They reached the choke point, a natural bridge of stone that connected two halves of the canyon system. Below it, molten rivers glowed faintly red. The air smelled of minerals and heat. It was the only way to reach the heart chamber. Mason crouched, scanning the shadows. This is where we hold them. Moments later, the first mech appeared. It was huge, 3 meters tall, legs like steel pillars, arms ending in heavy cannons that hummed with suppressed energy. The Narration gasped. Their weapons looked like toys in comparison. Mason didn't waste time staring. He fired first. His rifle round sparked harmlessly off the mech's armor. Figures, he muttered. Then his eyes caught something. Vents along the knees, faintly glowing from heat. Weak points. Sira, he shouted. Aim for the joints. Forget the body. Take the legs. The Narration obeyed instantly. Blue plasma bolts lit up the dark as they fired in unison. Sparks erupted, then a flash. One of the mech's legs buckled, and it crashed sideways with a mechanical roar. Good, Mason growled. Make them fall. They can't kill you if they can't stand. Another tremor rocked the tunnels. 2 more mechs marched in, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Mason dove for cover behind a pile of broken rock. A plasma round tore through the air where he'd just been standing, scorching the wall. He grabbed a fallen enemy's grenade belt and checked the symbols. Alien design, but similar mechanics. He pulled the pin on one, counted to 3, and threw. The explosion filled the tunnel with red fire. One mech staggered, its sensors flickering. Mason ran forward, slid under its collapsing frame, and fired a burst into the exposed wiring beneath its armor. It went still, its lights dimming to black. When he turned back, the Narration were cheering, the sound raw and wild. For the first time, they believed. Don't celebrate yet. Mason yelled. We've got more coming. Sira pointed down the corridor. Listen. A strange sound rolled through the tunnel. A deep, rhythmic pulse, not mechanical, but alive. Mason recognized it instantly. It was coming from the heart chamber above them. The heart, Sira whispered. It's waking. A beam of pale light shot through cracks in the ceiling. The tremors grew stronger, vibrating in Mason's bones. For a second, every weapon, every piece of machinery in the tunnels flickered. The mechs froze mid-step, their systems shorting out. Mason stared up. She did it. He sprinted back through the winding passageways, leaving the stunned Narration behind to finish off the disabled machines. As he climbed toward the heart chamber, the air grew warmer, brighter. Ancient glyphs along the walls began to glow, one by one, as if something long asleep was drawing breath again. When Mason burst into the chamber, he found Illyra kneeling before the great lotus-shaped device. Her silvery robes were soaked with sweat and streaked with blood. A shallow cut across her palm dripped into the glowing core. The heart pulsed with light, blue, gold, then white. Illyra. Mason rushed to her side, dropping to his knees. She looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and triumph. It's done, she whispered. The heart is alive. The entire chamber shook again, but this time it wasn't from explosions, it was from the heart itself. A wave of light rippled outward through the walls. Mason's ears rang as every energy weapon, every mech, every electronic system in the canyon went dead at once. The Scarlet Claw's assault stopped as if a giant hand had frozen time. Outside, in the skies above Vishara, the orbiting warship that Malgar had stationed there glowed suddenly, then burst apart in a silent bloom of fire. Elder Torian staggered into the chamber, eyes wide in awe. The ancient defenses, they still function. Mason helped Illyra to her feet. You just saved the planet. She shook her head weakly. Not yet. Malgar will not stop. He has something called Protocol Ashfall. He will destroy the city before surrendering. Then we stop him before he can. She pressed her palm against a control node on the heart's base. Holographic panels flickered to life, showing feeds from the planet's surface. Dots of red light blinked across the capital, hundreds of them. Illyra's expression turned grim. Explosives, set across the city. Mason clenched his fists. He's going to bury every witness. Her hands danced across the controls. I'm transmitting the proof of his crimes to the Galactic Council. Once they have it, they'll send help. How long? 8 minutes to full transmission. And how long before those bombs go off? She hesitated. Maybe 10. Mason gave a sharp nod. Then we've got 8 minutes to change history. He turned toward the exit, rifle slung over his shoulder. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, but he felt alive, clearer than he had in years. Illyra caught his hand before he left. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. If you go to face him, you may not return. Mason squeezed her hand. I didn't come this far to turn back now. Then he smiled, tired, fierce, human. Tell your people this. We don't bow to tyrants. Not on Earth. Not on Vishara. Not anywhere. He released her hand and sprinted into the smoke-lit tunnels, heading straight for the surface, straight for the monster who had tried to rule through fear. Behind him, the heart of Vishara pulsed brighter, its rhythm echoing his heartbeat. The war wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The night over Valen burned. Smoke rose from every district, curling like black rivers under the twin moons. The heart of Vishara had silenced the orbital cannons, but the city below was still in chaos. 100 fires, 1,000 voices crying out. Mason Cole guided the rover through the shattered outskirts, its headlights cutting across ruins and ash. Alira sat beside him, pale but steady, her eyes glowing faintly from the neural link that kept her connected to the heart. Every few moments, she blinked as new data poured into her mind. Bomb locations, enemy troop movement, civilian distress calls. He risked a glance at her. You holding up? Her voice was low, focused. I can feel the whole city now. Every heartbeat. Every explosion. It's like listening to my planet scream. Mason's jaw tightened. Then we stopped the one who's causing it. The rover climbed the broken slope leading to the governor's compound. It had once been the pride of Vishara. White spires of marble and steel, banners fluttering in the wind. Now it looked like a fortress under siege. Half the structure burned. The other half bristled with armed guards. Tell me you've got a back door, Mason said. Alira's lips curved faintly. Better. I have old tunnels. Built when my father was still alive. They lead straight under the compound. They parked beneath a collapsed bridge and slipped into a fissure between the rocks. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of stone and old machinery. Strange blue fungi glowed faintly on the walls, lighting their path. Behind them, the Narration fighters and a small team of Terran soldiers followed, the last survivors of the earlier battle. At the front, Colonel Rhea Park moved beside Mason, her armor scratched and scorched, but her posture unbroken. Never thought I'd take orders from a local, she muttered, nodding toward Alira. She's not local, Mason replied. She's the reason we're still alive. Park smirked. Fair. They reached an old service hatch made of oxidized steel. Alira knelt beside it, brushing her fingers across the panel. It recognized her genetic code with a soft chime, and the hatch slid open. The tunnel ahead glowed faintly, leading up toward the heart of the compound. Mason turned to his mixed group, human and Narration alike. Once we're in, no mistakes. Malgar's expecting us, and he's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. They moved quietly through the passage. The hum of power generators grew louder, and the faint thud of gunfire echoed from above. When they reached the exit, Mason peered through a crack in the wall, a narrow corridor lined with banners bearing Malgar's crest, a clawed hand clutching a planet. He hated symbols like that. They always belonged to men who built empires on fear. Alira touched his arm. The detonator is in his private chamber. Top floor, east wing. We disable it, and the city survives. Mason nodded. Let's finish this. They emerged into the compound silently, moving like shadows. The halls were half destroyed, marble cracked, wires sparking. A few guards remained, but their morale was shattered. Mason's team advanced efficiently, disabling them without a sound. At the grand stairway, they met resistance. A squad of Malgar's elite soldiers in crimson armor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the hall, echoing off the walls. Mason ducked behind a column, firing back in short bursts. Beside him, Rhea Park tossed a flash grenade, its white light flooding the chamber. Narration warriors leapt into the confusion, striking with their staff weapons, elegant, deadly arcs of blue energy. When the smoke cleared, the floor was littered with fallen armor and broken banners. The way forward was open. They climbed to the upper level, the air thick with smoke. Mason could feel the building's energy grid failing. Lights flickering, power systems whining in protest. Alira paused at a door of polished obsidian. The surface rippled faintly at her touch. This is it, she whispered. The door slid open, and waiting inside was Commander Threll, Malgar's right hand, a scarred alien with gray skin and eyes like cold stone. So the princess returns, Threll said. And she brings her pet human. Mason didn't answer. He fired. Threll's armor deflected the first shot, and the blast sent sparks cascading across the chamber. The commander lunged forward, swinging a blade that hummed with plasma energy. Mason barely dodged, the heat searing the air beside his neck. The fight was brutal, raw, close quarters, no finesse. Mason blocked, struck, twisted, fired again. The blade grazed his arm, slicing through his sleeve, but he ignored the pain. He slammed his rifle but into Threll's jaw, sending him reeling. Lyra extended her hand, and a surge of energy burst from her palm, a pulse from the heart itself. It struck Threll square in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall with enough force to crack the stone. He slumped, coughing blood. "You think killing me will change anything?" he spat. Malgar already started the sequence. "This city will burn before your council ever arrives." Mason stepped closer. "Then you just gave me where to look." He turned to Lyra. "Where's the control room?" "Through that door," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But Malgar won't run. He'll be waiting." "Good," Mason said. "Neither am I." They entered the final chamber. It was vast, lined with floating data screens and holographic displays showing the city below, red dots marking every bomb, every district doomed to fall. In the center stood Prefect Malgar, hands clasped behind his back, calm as a priest before an altar. His pale eyes glowed in the dark. "So," he said softly, "the soldier and the traitor finally arrive." Mason leveled his weapon. "You've lost, Malgar. The council has your files. The heart's awake. Your army's gone." "Lost?" Malgar smiled thinly. "No, human. I have achieved what no ruler has, control through fear. When this city burns, it will send a message to the stars. Obedience is survival." He lifted a small device, the detonator, its lights pulsing faster. "You can kill me, but you won't stop this." Mason didn't hesitate. He fired, not at Malgar, but at the power conduit above him. The burst hit home, showering sparks. The room went dark for a split second, and Lyra moved. She lunged forward, grabbing Malgar's wrist and slamming his hand against the wall-mounted scanner. The detonator's lights froze mid-flash. Then, beep. "Override accepted," the system's mechanical voice announced. Mason exhaled slowly. Malgar screamed, trying to pull away, but Mason's rifle was already pressed to his chest. "You're done." Outside, the sound of engines filled the air, the council's ships arriving in orbit, responding to Lyra's transmission. The fight was over. Lyra turned to Mason, her shoulders trembling, her face illuminated by the soft light of the screens. "It's over," she whispered. He looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the streaks of dirt and blood, and the faint glow of the heart still pulsing in her veins. "Yeah," he said, "but somehow, I think this is just the beginning." From the shattered windows behind them, the city lights flickered back to life one by one, glowing like stars reborn. And for the first time since he set foot on Bashara, Mason Cole allowed himself to believe. Maybe humanity hadn't just survived the galaxy. Maybe it was meant to change it. The first light of morning crept over the ruins of Valen. The twin suns rose like fire and gold, painting the shattered skyline in shades of hope and sorrow. For the first time in years, the city was quiet. No alarms, no gunfire, no marching boots. Only the wind moving through the empty streets and the faint hum of reconstruction drones beginning their work. Mason Cole stood on the balcony of what had once been the governor's compound. His uniform was torn, stained with blood and dust, but his eyes were clear. Below him, human engineers and Narration workers moved side by side, rebuilding what tyranny had destroyed. Lyra stood beside him, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in simple white. Her hands were still bandaged from the ritual. The faint glow beneath her skin, the mark of the heart, pulsed gently, like a heartbeat that now belonged to both her and the planet itself. "They're already clearing the old statues," Mason said, nodding toward the plaza where citizens pulled down the black banners of the Scarlet Claws. Lyra smiled faintly. "Malgar built monuments to fear. I will build spaces for memory." He turned toward her, studying her face. The exhaustion was still there, but so was strength, the kind that didn't fade when the fighting stopped. "You realize," he said, "you're about to be one of the most powerful people in this system." She looked out over the city. "Power means nothing if it isn't shared. My father once said leadership is not about command, but compassion. I failed to understand that before. Now I do." Mason leaned on the railing beside her. "You didn't fail. You survived." Their silence stretched comfortably as the sun climbed higher. The Galactic Council ships hung like silver shadows far above the atmosphere, silent witnesses to a new peace. The Council's peacekeepers had arrived hours earlier, arresting Malgur and his surviving officers. The corrupt regime was finished. Yet Mason couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only the beginning of something larger. Alira must have sensed his thoughts. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" He hesitated. "Orders will come. Reports to file. Debriefings. Someone back on Earth will want to pin a medal on this mess." She turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the twin suns. "And is that what you want? A medal?" He shook his head slowly. "No. What I want, I'm not sure Earth can give." A soft breeze lifted her white hair, and for a moment she looked almost unreal, like a vision carved from light. "Then perhaps you should stay," she said quietly. "Not as a soldier. As a bridge." He frowned slightly. "A bridge. Between our people. Between who we were and who we must become. Down below, children, human and Narration alike, were chasing one another through the half-rebuilt streets." Laughter echoed, fragile but real. Mason felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before his first deployment. Peace. "I'm not exactly diplomat material," he said, half smiling. Alira stepped closer. "You're exactly what diplomacy needs. Honest eyes, steady hands, and the courage to do what's right, even when it isn't easy." He laughed softly. "You really know how to recruit." She tilted her head. "I learned from the best." For a long moment, they simply stood there, watching the world they had saved. Then, far to the north, a shimmer of blue light rippled through the clouds, the heart of Vishara, resonating across the planet like a living beacon. "The heart is linked to you now," Mason said quietly. "What happens if it stops?" Alira's voice was calm. "Then the planet sleeps again. But I won't let that happen." The heart chose to awaken because the people were ready to stand together, human and Narration both. He nodded, still watching the horizon. "Maybe that's what we're all fighting for. Not dominance, not victory, just understanding." She smiled. "For a soldier, you sound a great deal like a philosopher." He grinned back. "Don't tell my commanding officer." They both laughed, and for the first time since the war began, the sound wasn't bitter. It was warm, real. From below, cheers began to rise, a crowd gathering in the main square. Elder Torian stood before them, his voice echoing through speakers as he announced the formation of the Vishara Restoration Council. Names were read, responsibilities shared. And then, a pause. He looked up at the balcony. "Alira Varen," he called. "By right of blood and by the will of the people, the council recognizes you as the High Envoy of Vishara." Applause erupted. Alira took a deep breath, glancing once at Mason before stepping forward. She raised her hand toward the people below. "The age of fear is over," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Today we begin the age of unity." Her words carried across the plaza, amplified not by machines, but by belief. Mason could see it in the faces below, humans and Narration together, nodding, smiling, ready to rebuild. When she turned back, her eyes shone with tears. "We did it," she whispered. He shook his head. "You did. I just refused to get out of your way." She laughed softly, stepping closer until she was right before him. "You underestimate yourself, Captain Cole." He gave her a small smile. "Mason," he corrected. Her voice lowered. "Then you underestimate us, Mason." She reached up, placing her hand gently over his heart, the same gesture she had made in the tunnels before the battle. He felt the warmth of her touch, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat syncing with his. And then, without words, she kissed him, slow, certain, filled with everything they had survived and everything still to come. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the quiet pulse of the heart far beneath the earth. When they finally parted, she whispered, "Our worlds have always looked at each other through glass. Let's finally open the door." He smiled. "Then let's walk through it, together." As the suns rose higher, casting their twin light across the rebuilt city, the human soldier and the alien envoy stood side by side, watching a new dawn spread across Vishara. Above them, the heart pulsed once more, a promise written in light. And for the first time in history, two species stood not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals, ready to build a future that belonged to both. Fade out. Title card. HFY. Humanity doesn't conquer worlds. It changes them.